Our speaker tonight comes by way of a suggestion of one of our long-term members. And when Pat says something, you listen.
Tell my kids, okay?
So anyway, which leads me to another, to ask that if you have something that you would like to have a topic and genealogy research, please talk to me after the meeting or at any point, because I will be booking or scheduling speakers for 25. In fact, I think I've already got January the 2nd already taken care of for 2025. So I would like to have, if you've got some leads of someone you think would make a good speaker or a topic to cover, let me know. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, something about Terry Ullman. Terry is going to be talking to us about George Victor Reed. And he said about the only thing that Terry told me was that he was a Tulare County deputy sheriff and banker, and that his demise was tragic. So, October 3rd is our annual members potluck. Then November, our speaker will be Kathy Burrow. Kathy, by the way, has been for the past 5 years doing a missionary for the LDS Church, and she's been living in Salt Lake City. So if you're into genealogy, you know that that's where you want to be if you've got to do a missionary for the church. Also, another thing that Pat told me tonight is that anyone here doesn't need an after meeting snack. So, because the person that was going to bring it tonight just called me 20 minutes ago and said she can't bring it. So Pat says everybody needs to be on a diet tonight. All of that said, our speaker tonight is David Hamilton. He is a retired attorney and amateur historian. And his topic tonight is, well, I put the name Genealogy of a Church, the first 150 years of the first Congregational Church of Tulare. So please join with me and welcome in.
Thank you, thank you. Dan asked me to use this mic. I'm going to have to hold it because I can't find any place to pin it where you can still hear it. So, I've been a member of the Tulare Congregational Church for 40 years. I live in Visalia, but we go back and forth every Sunday. This is a very special church, and it's worth the drive. We're, as you know, we're 150 years old this year. And when I first arrived in Tulare at our church, our pastor, James Bowser, told me like two things. Like, oh, well, our founding pastor's name was A.L Rankin, and his family had something to do with the Underground Railroad. And that just kind of got stored away, and I never really heard anything about it for a very long time. And then we have a church member named Nancy Hoyt. Some of you may know her. She was one of our historians in the church, and she used to speak, and it got me a little more interested. And then I got thinking about the 150th, and so I started researching, and what I found out was pretty amazing. About Tulare has a direct contact with the Underground Railroad. Adam Lowry Rankin, I'm going to call him Lowry. His friends called him Lowry, so I'm going to call him Lowry tonight. He was born in 1816, excuse me, in Tennessee, and he died in 1895. Okay, that was a mistake. Oh, there we go. He was born in Tennessee, and he died in Petaluma. And there is him as a young man. I'm not sure what year. That's his father. His father was a Presbyterian minister. He didn't, not only did he have his own church that he pastored, but he was an itinerant preacher starting black schools and churches all over Tennessee. And Tennessee being a slave state, it didn't go over real well. His congregation more or less asked him to leave. So they moved to Ripley, Ohio when Lowry was only 4 years old. He's the oldest of 13 kids, 9 boys and 4 girls. And so Reverend John Rankin, he moved to Ripley, Ohio specifically for the purpose to work on the Underground Railroad, because it's right on the Ohio River, directly across from the slave state Kentucky. So when the slaves would escape, they would go into Ohio. The slavery was illegal in Ohio at that time, but because of the Fugitive Slave Act, slave catchers could still pursue them even in Ohio. So it was very dangerous work. So they moved to Ripley in 1822, and one thing that's interesting about Ripley is that there were 3 black settlements already there. There were a couple of settlements. One was called the Gist settlement. So that's Reverend Rankin and his wife. I apologize, I can't find her name. He did an 800-page autobiography, and he always said my wife. He never really mentioned her name. But that house there, when they moved to Ripley, they lived in town, and that's their house. I'm not sure what that garage is all about. That must be a modern addition. But that's where they lived on Front Street when Lowry was 4 years old when they moved there. John Rankin was the founder and first president of Ripley College, which both Lowry and Ulysses S. Grant attended. I want to talk more about Grant in the future. And Reverend John Rankin, he died in 1886, and then he's buried there in Ripley. So they lived on Front Street in that house for a couple of years, and then there were one reason he picked Ripley, because it was already a quote-unquote hotbed of abolitionists, and so he was working with other people in town, but he decided he wanted to be in a different place, so he found a hilltop overlooking the river, and the first scene on the far right there, that's the stairway long time ago, and then the other picture, in 1936, the property, the house and the barn were donated to the Ripley Museum, and it's been totally restored to the way it was in the 1850s. The dinnerware, the furniture, everything, just like the way it was when Adam Lowry and his family lived there. It was called Freedom Hill or Freedom Stairs. There's a book called Freedom Stairs that is back there. You can look at. It's a story about Adam, about some of his adventures growing up working on the Underground Railroad. There's the entire family. Later on, and the picture was not labeled, and looking at it, I don't think Lowry's in it. If he is, he might be the third person from the right, I mean from the left, 1, 2, 3, yeah. Because there's 2 boys missing. All the girls are there, but there's 2 boys missing. And being later on, he may have been in California by that point. I'm not sure. When you saw the house, there was a lantern that they would light when it was safe to approach. Has anybody heard of the American Golden Dollar? The innovation series? Every 3 months, United States Mint, state gets to pick their favorite invention or whatever they're proud of. Ohio honored the Underground Railroad, and this you can't get that at the bank, but the U.S. Mint does have them for sale. So I was pretty impressed that Ohio was represented on that coin. On the left is a picture of Ripley, a steamboat landing, and then on the right side is a picture of Ripley from the Kentucky side of the river, and you can see up on that ridge on the left between the trees, that's the Freedom House, that's where the Rankins lived. He enrolled in Ripley College when he was 14, but by the time he was 16, he realized that he had a fascination for all things mechanical. He did not want to be a reverend like his father. So after a couple months of bickering, they finally said, okay, fine, you can leave Ripley College, but under two conditions. One is you have to come back for your senior year, and the second condition was that he apprenticed with his uncle. And his uncle lived on Front Street, not far from that other house. So he apprenticed between 14 and 16 and 17 or so. He apprenticed as a carpenter with his uncle during the day, and then he studied architecture at night and weekends. He worked on, there were hundreds of riverboats were built in Ripley. Back in the 1830s, 40s, Ripley and Cincinnati were like the two major cities on the river. Ripley, they built riverboats. He was a carpenter on building new boats. Ripley was also a major export of pork and other supplies that went south on the Mississippi down to the plantations. And I read somewhere that somebody was explaining it to Lowry that they only shipped pork because the plantations did not feed beef to the slaves. So the only thing that got shipped south meat-wise was pork. One of the times he was working on a steamship called Fair Play one time, and he saw an incident with 20 or so slaves chained together, and based on what he witnessed, he decided that, oh, okay, well maybe I should become a pastor. So he, after his apprenticeship, he went to Lane Seminary. One thing interesting about when he was apprenticed with his uncle, like I said, they lived on Front Street, and Lowry built a secret 8-step stairway from the attic to a peak that you couldn't see, and put a lantern there. And so if that lantern was off, it was safe in town. If the lantern was on, it meant there were slave catchers roaming around. And then the house had opposite signal. If the light was on, it was safe to come, and if the light was off, it was not. So he went to Lane Seminary, and that was founded by Lyman Stowe, who was Harry Beecher Stowe's father. And the Stowes and the Rankins were very close. That is one reason why Lowry went to Lane Seminary. While he was attending Lane Seminary, there were a couple of times a week he would actually be involved in the Underground Railroad. He would do his studies, and then at night he would help somebody move to the next station. So he was involved even during those years. We've all heard of Uncle Tom's Cabin. There's one chapter in the book about Eliza's flight. Eliza was a slave that escaped in the middle of winter with her like a 6-month-old baby. And this story is in Uncle Tom's Cabin, and that story actually happened at the Rankin house. Lowry tells of waking up one morning and seeing Eliza in the kitchen with her wet clothes all over. And they moved her on, but then she came back about 5 months later to go the other direction, because she wanted to go down and get her children and bring them back. And so the Rankins helped her get back into Kentucky. And I don't know if that trip was successful or not. And the picture to the right, that's the president of Lane, and I think his wife. I'm sorry, I'm not sure if that was his wife or his daughter. A lot of these pictures weren't labeled that I found. So there's a young Ulysses Grant. This is not a big stretch of imagination, but I think Lowry and him at least knew each other if they were not friends, because in 1836, Lowry was an older teenager. General Ulysses S. Grant went to Ripley College because there were some subjects he needed brushing up on, some math, stuff like that. So he spent a year in Ripley at Lowry's dad's university, and then from there he went to West Point. It went to West Point in 1939. Lowry was in the Civil War. He was in the 113th Regiment, Illinois Infantry, and then mustered on October 1st, 1862, and General Grant was the commanding officer of that unit. In the whole 4 years that Lowry was in the Civil War, General Grant was his superior officer. They were there at the siege of Vicksburg, and they fought off Forrest in Memphis on 21 General Forrest on August 21st, 1864 in Memphis. Another reason why I think that they must have each known each other is because in 1860, it would have been 1864, yeah, the election was in November and the war was kind of winding down. They were in Memphis, and Tennessee was being occupied by the Federals at that point. So all the soldiers wanted to go vote, but Lowry said, okay, fine, I'll stay. He ended up staying back. He was very in favor of Lincoln, but for whatever reason, he just did not like Andrew Johnson. And he refused to vote because they had to, if you voted for one, you had to vote for both. So he said, fine, you guys go vote, I'll stay here. He commanded the fort for a couple of days while everybody else went to vote. Let's see. I tried to find a picture of him as president. Oh, the other interesting thing is that all the years that Lowry was here in Tulare, Grant was president for the entire time. He ended up in Memphis in 1866. I don't know if you've heard of the Memphis riots, but he was there for that. For 3 days they were rioting. Every single black church, home, and school was burned down. Lowry was the president of the Black Bank and the Tract Society, which sold school supplies for all kinds of students, including black students. The mob tried to burn it down. It's a long story, but him and his 14-year-old son and another officer held them off, and it was the only black-related building in Memphis that wasn't destroyed those 3 days. And his insurance company sent him back his premium, said, here, we're not going to insure you anymore. And so they sent him the money, and he took the money and he paid for 2 armed guards, one to stay outside his house and one to stay outside the house. So they had guards for a year or so based on this insurance money. Then he was in Memphis from 1866 until 1873. You've all heard of the slave ship Amistad, where there was a lot of trials going on, and the American Mission Society was a congregational group that was involved with helping the slaves on La Amistad. And the American Mission Society is the group that sent Lowry here. It was the American Mission Society and the Congregationalists in California sent him to Tulare. And another important thing, the Golden Spike, which was driven in 1869, that connected both coasts with the railroad. And it was less than 4 years later that Lowry came to Tulare. So the Golden Spike was a very important thing. As they used to say in court, one moment please. So it was only 6 years after the Civil War that he came to Tulare, and I mentioned that Grant was president the whole time. And when he came here, there was only about 25 people, so it was definitely the mission field, clearly. And he had done some mission work in Iowa before the war, so it was something he was used to, living in an area where there weren't very many people. So the first meeting was in December of 1873. December 1872, and then the Rankins arrived in January of 1873, and then the church was incorporated in November of 1874. And the reason why they decided to send him here was because the Southern Pacific Railroad announced that they were going to be the terminus was going to be built here. There was going to be a roundhouse and all these buildings. And so Congregational Church said, yeah, we want in. So they went ahead and sent Lowry here. Back in those days, the Presbyterians and the Congregationalists had an agreement that they would not start a church in the same town in the mission field. So Visalia got the Presbyterian Church, and Tulare got the Congregational Church. They met in schoolhouses until they were able to build their first building. And with Lowry's architecture and carpenter skills, he pretty much single-handedly designed and built this building. There was some help with the congregants. The railroad employees got together and purchased a 500-pound bell for the steeple. So that is the first church. The first church he called Church of the Redeemer. So that's the church and the parsonage, and that was on the northwest corner of King and I. And it was there from 1874 until 1899. And according to the memoirs of Lizzie Woods, she said that Reverend Rankin was the first person to plant shrubs and bushes and flowers in Tulare. This is during the time the Church of Redeemer was there. On the left is a letter to the editor from Lowry, thanking the ladies of the church for arranging on very short notice, a Christmas party for him and his family. It was quite a morale boost for him and his family, because times were not easy here, all things considered. Judge Lovejoy was a member, and his family. And that's one thing about the history of our church, is that in many ways the history of the church is the history of Tulare, because when you go through the records, there are just so many names there. And then on the right, it's talking about somebody named Ah Wing opened, it doesn't say Chinese, but that's a Chinese name, so he opened a restaurant. Ah Wing was a member of our church, which I find pretty amazing that we had a Chinese member. Back here, I have the first page of our register. Ah Wing's not on that. He was number 42. He's on the next page, and I had not been able to find out anything else about him. Here, that's our second pastor. That's Reverend F.E. Wales. He was the whistling minister, and in those Victorian times, for some reason, that was frowned upon. So he caused a lot of controversy. During those years, the church acted much like a community center. There were all kinds of events. I couldn't list them all. There were all kinds of events. I thought the double wedding was interesting because it had state-of-the-art lighting. It had coal oil, and so it was well lit for those days. And there were a lot of people used it for a lot of different reasons. There was an article, December 27th, somebody called the Lao Club will meet tonight in the basement of the Congregational Church, which really confuses me. I had no idea it had a basement. I can't imagine them having a basement here, but that's what it said in the newspaper. The statewide railroad union had a meeting here from all over California, and they were all invited to the Congregational Church on their time off to come and worship. However, in 1899, the church, there was a fire. First of all, the parsonage burnt down twice. It burnt down once, and they rebuilt the second one. And then Lizzie Woods was a member of the church. Her parents were original members, as was she. She was like 7 years old when the church started. And her parents' names are on that paper. And she wrote, "The greatest tragedy ever to befall our church was in August 1899 when the church and most of the furniture was destroyed by fire." The pastor had a library, he had a very outstanding library. She said it was considered one of the finest. That was lost. And she goes on to say, however, services were not interrupted, but were held in Schultz's Hall, which is now the IOOF Hall. And that building burned down. And so they had to move again. And but it wasn't one of the big fires with all downtown burned. It was just one or two buildings at that particular time. So then they moved to the Guild building, and things were there until they finally got the next church built. And there it is. This is one of the only pictures I've seen where it's not white. It was painted dark, and I believe this is the oldest picture I've seen of it. This picture was taken by Merv Fulton, which I'm sure you all know very well. Another interesting thing about researching the church is we have all the documents. We have 2 file cabinets. For the last 150 years, lots of people have been pack rats, and just piled stuff. And it's in too far there. I know it's kind of a hassle trying to hold it and talk in the right place. Is that better? Okay, I'll try to keep it there. And it's interesting seeing some of the names on the deeds. Here's the deeds for the new building. William Cartmill and let's see, who was the other one? There were a couple of famous names. Those are the 2 deeds, and there's the newspaper notice of the transfer, W.W. Wright. But Mrs. Cartmill also was involved in that. They purchased like 5 lots for that. These are more pictures from the Merv Fulton collection. The one on the left is the Tulare's new passenger depot in 1941, and then the bottom one is really fascinating to me. That's Stella Bender is driving. Mrs. Bardsley is in the back seat, and the little girl is her daughter. Mrs. Walker is standing in the back of the car, and Stella's mom and dad are standing by the car. And that's description with what I found with the picture. And I don't know if any of them are members of the church, but one of these days I'll figure that out. Has anybody ever heard of a Chautauqua? The Chautauqua? Okay, got a few. The Chautauqua was an adult education movement in rural America, and Teddy Roosevelt called it the most American thing in America. It was basically ran from 1874 to 1930, and nearly 40 million people were involved over the 50 years, and it was called a place to enrich lives through education, inspiration, and recreation. It was an adult education movement, and you could actually go to classes at the different Chautauquas, and they were giving college-level degrees to women in the farm areas after they would go to all these classes. They started off as like a permanent camp, but then as time went on, they started becoming more like a moving camp, like that tent over there on the far right. This over here on the left is the Hillsdale Imperial Girls Band, and that is William Jennings Bryan. And the reason why I showed those pictures is because the Chautauqua was in Tulare from what I could tell, 1813 and the last one was in 1920. Tulare, the the Methodist pastor in Tulare was a big honcho. He went on the road. He toured with them. He was in charge of it, going all over the West Coast, California, Oregon, and Washington. And so the one on the right is talking about the Chautauqua coming to Tulare, and this one over here on the left, the Congregational Church and the Christian Church, called the Disciples of Christ, they closed down, when this Chautauqua was here, they closed down, they held joint services at the Chautauqua. And the way I found out there was a connection about this was reading Lizzie Wood's memoirs, because she talked about how much she enjoyed the Chautauquas. Every time they came in, she would stay at a friend's house, and it went all day. It went from the morning till late at night. There were classes, there was entertainment, there was music, all kinds of stuff, but it was all basically educational. I just threw that in there because I know he was one of our favorite pastors, and I put that in there to say that I've not been able to find a whole lot of pictures, either in our collection or even in the newspaper. There's a lot of articles in the paper, but not a whole lot of pictures. So I put that in there. This is when he first came to the church in 1960. One thing that our church is known for is music. From the very beginning, there's been music at our church. There's always been a state-of-the-art organ, even from the very beginning. I've lost count of the number of organs that we've had over the years, but it's more than you would suspect, because music is so important. And there's also, like I said before, there are a lot of community events. They would do like lecture series about serious topics. They would do plays. There's an article that I saw that it looked like a Shakespeare play or something, like in 1898. They had a picture of all the kids, and I was not able to find that to put into this slideshow. One thing in modern times that we're known for is the chamber concert, and I'm sure a lot of you have been to that. It was started by Ursula Bisconner, and I forgot the first year. Here's an article about the 11th, and there's one for the 41st, and I think are we still doing them, I think. Not for the last year or two? Yeah, they've gone on for a very long time, and it was a very classical thing where they would have professional level people that sang that good to come in and do opera and stuff like that. Ursula started because she was from Germany, and I guess she missed the opera stuff, and so started doing it, and it caught on. It's been going on for years and years. I probably shouldn't say this, but my wife Gloria and Pat played it together, I think, many years ago. Back in December, the museum had an exhibit about Tulare, and we set up a bunch of stuff so you can see some of the records that we have. For people doing genealogy research, I think these records, if you know that somebody went to that church, there's going to be a lot of information. The problem is it's all in the books. It's not been digitized yet. I've talked to somebody about trying to get that done, but it's a very difficult and probably expensive thing to do. But so there's 3 different shots of the items that we had on display. That's the silver that belonged to the Women's Fellowship. There's Christmas time. We always decorate the church for Christmas. I love it when we're able to get the wreath on the spire. Everybody has seen the Hillman House as you drive on Tulare, 220 West Tulare. It was built about 1910, and it's very interesting because all the papers the deeds and everything are in the records. And the way they were able to build that is they got people to pledge money, a certain amount, and all the names of all the people that pledged are in there. And there's a lot of names I recognized, a lot of street names and stuff. So it was about 1910, and it was very modern. It made the news. It was the newspaper, and then in the I'm not sure what year it was named the Hillman House after Elizabeth Hillman, who she taught Sunday school at our church for 45 years. She was a Sunday school superintendent for many years. She was a church secretary. She did all kinds of stuff. She was the mother of Don. Yeah, Don Hillman, who was a board supervisor for many years. And she did a lot of stuff during World War II, a lot of Red Cross activities, very active. So that's the Hillman House. And so we're looking forward to another 150 years. We welcome you all to come visit. And we have a new pastor, and that's him. He is in the Army. He's in the Army Reserves. So we lose him a weekend a month and 2 weeks during the summer. One thing I had a problem getting in there was I wanted to talk a little bit about, we had our first woman pastor in 2002, I mean, yeah, it was close to 25 years ago. And she was not the first woman pastor in Tulare, but she was the first woman pastor for our church. And she was one of the longest serving ones that we had. And one thing that I kind of kid Pastor Chris about is that he's the first male pastor we've had in 22 years. Okay, that's it. Church is really at 10:30 if you want to come visit. So any questions? Or I've got one thing I'd like to say is one thing that I found when I got to researching this is how many books and movies there's out there about Larry and his family. John Rankin, his dad, is in the Underground Railroad Hall of Fame, whatever you call it, the statue. I have a QR code. I have a QR code here. I have two. One is if you click on that, you'll go to a 45-minute video that the Ripley Museum made about Ripley, Ohio. The first 15 minutes is about Ripley, the town itself, all the people that live there, and then the last half an hour is mostly about the Rankin family. And then the second QR code, I only have one of these, so I'm going to leave it up here, and you can click on whichever one you want. And then the second one is an 8-minute radio article from NPR, Ripley, Ohio's role in the underground. And then there was a play that was written about it, and John Rankin is one of the characters in the play, and I have our QR code for that. So, Susan.
Yeah, I would just like to invite everybody to our big celebration, community celebration on October 13th, which is a Sunday from noon to 4, where you'll be allowed, well, not be allowed, but you're welcome to come in, and Dave's going to take you through the church and give you a tour of everything in there. And we're going to have outside events going on, and food trucks and music, and really going to make a big celebration for our church on October 13th. You'll probably see more of that in the chamber and different places advertising. Yeah.
Any questions? Okay, I'll hand it over to Dan.
Well, I know about the record. We were invited to see if we can give our 2 cents worth on some of the records. It's very difficult, and we're facing the same thing, probably with your own records. What do you do with all this stuff, valuable stuff, priceless stuff that you've accumulated over the years? And it is difficult. You know, we talked about digitizing. A lot of organizations and even people are doing that, but even that's pretty labor intensive. You have to have the equipment and someone who's willing to go through page by page and do that. But I think it's one of those things, if you can get everything coordinated, it's very worthwhile, because otherwise you think, what's going to happen to it in the future? all it takes is for whoever is toured with, so to speak, housing that, and if something happens to them, is the next person that come along going to value it and take care of it, or will it be lost? So while, talking about pack rats, well, that's what Rochelle and I's problem is, you have stuff and you don't want to get rid of it because it's the originals. But on the other hand, if you don't like back it up somehow, like digitizing or something, then it increases the chances of it getting lost. You talk about, buildings, and a lot of the buildings, especially since many were made out of wood, a lot of buildings were lost in those days. Well, if all your records and everything are in one of those buildings, and there's a fire, and you haven't digitized them or some way, kind of a secondary backup, then you're lost. So it is something to try to consider to figure out how to do it. But it is a problem. But yeah, valuable stuff. I'm from Exeter, grew up in Visalia, born and raised in Visalia, but I'm kind of like a secondary Tularian because I spent so much time over here in the genealogy room that I've spent a good amount of time over here. So I kind of feel like an adopted Tularian in a way. And so even me, not being as familiar with Tulare as someone that's native Tularian, I go through some of the records they have and see all these names, and just driving around town, oh, Cardigan, oh, Bardsley, okay. Now I see the connection between that street name and the people, and I think that's kind of important. So I don't know about anybody else, I sure enjoyed his presentation, and now you know a lot more, because you can't go back that far in Tulare history without, this is just on the church, but look at all, clear across, even back to the freedom trade and everything like that. You've got this involvement with history of the whole United States, kind of focused here with this church in Tulare. So, thank you very much.
I have two handouts, I think you already have. I just want to explain what it is. One of them is a reproduction of the church program for our 60th anniversary. And in there is Mrs. Lizzie Woods. This is her memoir, and it's pretty fascinating. So that's what this one is. And then in November of last year, we celebrated the 149th anniversary of the incorporation by recreating the service when it was incorporated in 1874 as best we could. Christine Keller, our organist and pianist, played all songs correct to the period. We had a band there that played, and so that's what this is the program from that day. And like I said, we just started the service. There were 3 people doing impersonations. There was Reverend Rankin. There was Charles Pope, who was the pastor from Benicia that came down to do the incorporation, and then one of the first members, Jane Moore. So we had those 3 people impersonated, and they just came in and we did the service. And so there were a lot of words and a lot of things that were said that maybe most people wouldn't understand. So in this one, there's a glossary of terms that was used during that service.
You might add that Jane Moore was played by Heidi Clark.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, Heidi Clark was Jane Moore.
And for anyone that hasn't seen, you've got a wonderful display back here. I for sure take a look at that. And also for the genealogists, it's not all genealogy books. Between the 2 boxes on the top of the shelf up here, everything below is for the book sales. But we have donations that come in, or going through books, we get things that we can't use in the room. A lot of times we have duplicates, or they're not really relevant to what we have in there. Anyway, all the books between those 2 boxes on the top shelf are looking for new homes. So if you would like to adopt a book, but the only thing is, don't bring it back. You're done with it. Okay? You might take a look through there. You're welcome to them. They're free. They just need somebody to read them and take care of them. And since we don't have snacks, we will pretend that we're eating something wonderful on the way home. And we'll see it next time. So then, unless you have something else, I think we're done. And yeah, do take advantage of looking at the display back here and take home a couple of books. We'll even give you the box if you want to take home the box.
And tell them if they want to join the Sorry Genealogical Society.
Yes, yes. If you want to join, you don't have to join, to come to our meetings are always free as part of one of our services to the community. But if you want to join, we do have some membership over there. So we'll do that too. So anyhow, that's it for us, and take advantage of the display and the books if you'd like.
Well, we're saying